have here today a number of people from the design team. Most of them you have met at one time or the other, so y'all can raise your hands. We all have pink on our name tags. You will hear from many of us during the course of the evening. So we are here at CPC 4. Thank you, as Eric said, for hanging with us. The last time we met was way back in early December. So before the holidays, before that extra week of school, before the ice storms, so here we are. So our goal today is actually to share with you some comprehensive plan options. So at our last meeting, we were helping build up the story, the history, the information that was going to help you understand the Cleveland High School sites and the factors going into this building, the existing building, things like that, and start to think about what might be able to work here. Today we're going to show you 4 approaches. So here's an image from our last meeting where we shared information about comprehensive high schools, the site program, and the existing building. If you'll recall, this is right after we had done tours of this building, of Grant High School and of Lincoln High School. We talked about, asked you to give us feedback on historical features of the building, on the auditorium, and on how we balance the competing needs for a relatively small amount of land. So today, looking ahead, we're actually going to share information about where we are in community-based engagement. We're going to share our updated vision and goals. We're going to show 4 comprehensive design options. Don't try to look at these too closely, but we will get into those in detail in a minute. And then we're going to talk about ways that the designs meet the goals that you all have helped us develop. And then we'll ask for your feedback, both in written form at your seats and then in poster form back there on everything we're presenting. So at the end of the meeting, I hope everybody feels really comfortable in where we are, that we have a shared vision that has been supported by our community engagement process, that we understand the comprehensive plan approaches, and we understand the key variables. You'll notice tonight there's a couple of very key roles to keep talking about. Is it going to be this or that? And try to help us narrow down our decision making and provide some evaluation. So I'm going to invite Rhonda up real quick to give you some insights into what they have been doing with After Bruce and the CHS community over the last month.
Thank you very much. My name is Rhonda Tini. I use pronouns like she and her. And I'm with the After Bruce team for community engagement. So little recap of what we've done. We've done stakeholder interviews with some key folks like the principal, a few members of staff, and that helped us learn more about what we need to ask in the upcoming community listening session. So we have 10 set for between late January through early March, and a number of the groups will be disclosed in the next couple of slides. So we'll keep on going. And then community-based engagement. So it does look like these dates are a little outdated, so we'll make sure the updated ones go out before we post this. But we really found that there needed to be these groups called out and getting the attention for at least a 90-minute session so that we really get personal feedback. We also are going to create like a Google Form survey for folks that can't make it to it, but we still want to get their opinion. So these are some of the sessions that we'll be doing, and we'll be putting out outreach for a number of these sessions to get more folks from the community. And then this last bit is just some insight that we heard from those stakeholder interviews. Some questions that came up was really important. We're talking about cafeterias and lunch spaces, referring to classrooms rather or as learning spaces, so they can kind of be more multi-use and functional. And again, just calling out a few of the groups that we especially want to talk to, such as student leaders of some affinity groups, as well as folks from the special education programs at school. And then I'll pass it back over to Eric for the next slide.
Does anybody have questions about any of this before we move on?
If you do, I'll just be in the back.
And this is real brief, just some of the other outreach that we're doing directly from the district. Of course, we have here with our committee, we have our design workshops that we're having, as well as we're just reaching out to the entire catchment area, to all the schools that feed into Cleveland, neighborhood associations, business associations, student leadership. We're hoping to set some times where we can come into leadership classes and also share what we're working on and kind of get their feedback. We've seen that be really successful in other projects where we can engage student leadership, and then they can go out and talk to their peers and kind of spread good information that we can give them as opposed to what they might be hearing. Jan, question?
I am strongly suggesting that student leadership be also the class officers, not just the kids that are enrolled in the 2 leadership classes, but the leadership of each class. That will be
Yes, that we work
way,
on
way,
that.
way better coverage.
Yeah, so we're communicating with Jan and Joanne and trying to get that
Right.
organized. But yeah,
Right.
that's a great way for us to engage kids. And we're also thinking about opportunities where we could be here after school and to provide perhaps some drop-in opportunities for kids to see what we're doing.
It took me a minute to process that last slide for a second, so I'm backtracking for
Yeah.
a moment, sorry.
Yeah.
When you said classrooms versus learning centers, is that the possibility of teachers having to roam?
No,
Okay,
no, it was meant to be a comment that we wanna talk to, the various, groups that Afterbirth is reaching out to and talk about all the spaces that students are learning in, so including like the coffee shop that the special education students work in and all the
Great.
different spaces. We're not just talking about what people think of as like the 4 walls of
okay,
the class.
thank you. Thanks for the clarity.
Good job.
Okay?
Can I ask
Another question?
just in terms of this isn't really sort of a special interest, but what about staff? Like coming out, I know that there was a staff meeting
Yes.
before winter break. Is there gonna be more follow-up with Cleveland staff specifically through this initial process?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
In fact, I think we're in the process of reaching out to Joanne about getting on the agenda for a forthcoming meeting. And then there will be groups with, teachers and staff of color, specifically is one of the groups has been identified for the community-based engagement conversations. So if you recall from the early conversations with After Bruce, the work they are doing will be feeding into this process and hopefully informing what we all are thinking about and how we're helping prioritize. And it will continue to inform the process all the way through the design process. So even though, it actually takes quite a while to get everyone on board and get the meetings scheduled and with the changes to the winter break and the storms and things like that, we've had a few hiccups in scheduling. So, but we will keep bringing those voices in as we can. So I'm going to talk about some of the feedback that we've gotten so far. If you recall, at the last meeting, we had a bunch of really colorful spectrums, we called them. We asked everyone to take a black dot and put a dot on somewhere on that line. And that was a really good way for us to understand if we take some of the subjects that we're dealing with in a kind of a la carte fashion, where are people interested? So we did that exercise with you all. We also did that exercise at the public meeting back in December. We also did that exercise with the entire CHS staff at the very first staff meeting of the new year. So that has given us a lot of different data sets to look at. So I'm going to show you some of those results. We will give you the detailed numbers, so if you want to pour through them, you can. So as you can see, these are color-coded. So these are all the questions we asked. I've got a second slide as well. The CPC, so this group is blue. The public meeting was the yellow color, and the staff meeting was the purple color. And what we're showing looks a little complicated, but it's the average of if we took all the votes across the spectrum for each answer. It's the numerical average of those votes. And then you see a little number, that's how many total participants we had. So for this example, 24 people from the CPC voted on this question of whether or not the theater and the performing arts spaces should be co-located on the main campus or separate from the main building. And mathematically, the sum of everything was in the middle. As you can see, the staff was actually way more towards this side of co-locating the theater with the main campus. The public was ever so slightly to the right towards a separate building. So
obviously there was much wider range in each of those, but that's just the mathematical average that we saw. And then you'll see slight differences in the numbers of how many people put dots. So for some reason, one more person voted in this line and two more people voted here, or somebody picked up 2 dots and added their extra emphasis, I don't know. And I'll show you the second slide, and then we can go into the ones that we are noticing show the most differences. So here we have some of the questions about taller building, which everybody was sort of to the left on. Whether or not, I think this is a big one we're going to be talking about today, whether or not we should be splitting the academic program across 2 sites or combining it onto 1 site. Everybody was slightly to the right of that, with the CPC actually being the most vocal about using 1 site versus 2. When we talked about keeping the existing building, you'll notice the staff are the most sort of likely to say, let's rebuild the entire building, whereas the public was the most likely to say, well, let's think about the value of the building. So different perspectives, different knowledge, different background that people are bringing to this conversation. So the 4 that I think are the most significant that we'll be addressing today in our conversations. The first one I mentioned earlier, so the theater. Is the theater part of this contiguous site that we're on today? Or is it potentially across 26th Street on 2nd site with the Sky Bridge? So the staff seemed more interested in co-location, whereas the CPC and the public were a little more towards the middle. Parking versus open space. We'll talk a lot about that. We only have a limited amount of site, and whether or not some of that is dedicated, or more of that is dedicated towards parking versus open space. As you can see, the CPC was actually way in favor of open space. Public and the staff started to go towards the middle and say, let's make sure we're really balancing the parking needs and the open space needs. And then the PE, should PE be co-located on the main campus, or should it be located near the track and field? So again, we have the CPC saying definitely on the main campus. We've got the conversation we all had here. The public and the staff were a little more towards maybe it could be down by the track and fields. We have since talked to PBS, and they said really academically, programmatically, we need the PE program to be, the gyms to be on the main site throughout the day, but we can certainly talk about that. And then the final one was, I mentioned before, was just this range of keeping the historic building versus rebuilding the entire building. And again, the public was more interested in keeping the existing building, whereas the people who use the building were maybe less interested in that.
Just a question. When the staff responded to that question, the theater co-location, was that with the understanding that it would be a Sky Bridge, or were they thinking about safety of crossing?
We talked about, I was actually ill for that meeting, so if one of my team members who was there.
Can you repeat the question?
Yeah, the question was, when staffs were interested in moving the Performing Arts Center across, separate from the main building, were they thinking about the fact that it needed a Sky Bridge? Would it come with a Sky Bridge? Was that a dual decision?
I would say that that is one of the reasons why it's on here, is that we want to understand what was packaged in people's understanding. I think that we didn't specifically articulate it on the spectrum that it would come with a Sky Bridge to put program over on 26th. And we'll talk about this a little bit in the further slides, but just as a baseline, since it's coming up now, our understanding is if we put program across 26th Avenue, we are going to include a Sky Bridge as part of any approach that does that. And there's some more details about that Sky Bridge and what that we'll talk about in a little bit, but it's not totally clear to us whether that was understood by everyone who was doing the spectrum.
Thanks.
Yeah, thank you. All right, so yeah, we will,
On the on-site versus open space, I remember talking to somebody, but that one seemed like a little bit of maybe like a false dichotomy, because people had also talked about like a tuck under potentially, so like you kind of have a little bit of both. I don't think
yeah,
that
so
was like incorporated in that.
yeah. We have looked at tuck under, at underground parking. The challenge is that the cost goes up astronomically, like $12 million or something like that. 16 million, excuse me, Erin, just paying closer attention to the numbers. So, you know, in terms of a sort of available land, it is a dichotomy. I think in terms of like, would we put more money towards structured parking compared to open space, I think, or compared to academic program? I think that's the other side of the question, which people also didn't like us asking. They said, why can't we have parking structures and every bit of the academic program? So I think the challenge is we're gonna have a bucket of money, and we have to decide where that money gets allocated, and do we want to spend, you know, to the tune of $16 million to put parking underground, when that takes out significantly of the building budget? Yeah.
Yes, I was not able to make the Lincoln tour. How did Lincoln High School deal with parking on their site?
So Lincoln has, I think it's 74 parking spaces. They are sort of back under the bleacher area.
Okay.
And then they are leasing some spots off-site to help accommodate teachers, because of course in that neighborhood you can't street park you can't street park unless you pay the meter, but you can only do that for 2 hours. We'll have an opportunity to look and show you what some of these options are too. This is all very abstract. That's one thing we want to recognize with the spectrums is they were an abstraction. They weren't paired with drawings. So today we'll show you more detailed drawings where we've shown things measured out and have a better sense of what these dichotomies mean. We did want to circle back, and I'm going to ask my colleagues to hand out the vision sheets. So based on all the comments we got, again, from this group, from the public meeting, from the staff, we have adjusted the vision statement a little bit. We'll give it to you right now so you have it for your own reference. If you want to email any changes, ideas to the email address there, please feel free. So the modernized CHS will draw inspiration from its context to create a vibrant campus that centers students and staff. The design will celebrate the school's role at the heart of the CHS community, a vital part of the neighborhood, and an enduring presence in Southeast Portland. So we think of that as like the big idea. As we're going through all of these approaches today, we're showing you diagrams, we're thinking about the old school, we're thinking about carbon, we're thinking about all the different factors. We invite you to keep coming back to this statement and think about, is it ringing true? Because this is something that now has been vetted, the ideas have been vetted, the subtle changes that we made were based on comments that we received from those 3 groups. And then we have paired this vision statement with 6 goals that, again, we showed you a version of these at the last meeting. We've shared them with all 3 audiences, and we think that they help actually explain more the detail about how we might approach this and give us a framework to evaluate our approaches. So these are to develop academic, curricular, extracurricular excellence with intercultural understanding. So that's a goal that this the renewed CHS will be able to do. That the building will have some sort of role in that. The phrase intercultural understanding is directly related to the IB program, in the sense that it's important to recognize that somehow in the architecture. We don't know the answer yet, but we know that it should be. That the modernized CHS will promote health, wellness, and climate resiliency, so personal health as well as climate health. That the modernized CHS will improve student safety in and around the sites. We'll talk directly about that today and some of the measures that we've researched that we can do. The modernized CHS will create a welcoming, inclusive environment that supports students and staff. I think that's very high in everyone's minds. I will say at the comprehensive plan level, we're not getting into a lot of detail about that, but as we go into the schematic slide, we'll start talking about that, all the features that will help create that environment. We want to make sure the modernized CHS acknowledges the indigenous legacy of the site. At the beginning of every meeting, we read this land acknowledgement that was written by students, and we felt like it was important to put this in the goal statements and think about how that maybe does or doesn't reflect itself in the design approach. And finally, that the modernized CHS will enhance CHS's role as a civic presence and community resource. There's a lot of comments about seeing the school, knowing it's here. It's kind of milieu of Southeast Portland and how important that is for students, for neighbors, and just for the whole community. And so thinking about how the building will reflect that. So we're going to, do you have a question? No? Okay. So again, you have the words in front of you. Feel free to make notes, email comments, chat with us as we move on. But I'd like to turn it over to my colleague Amanda, who is going to remind us where we've been in terms of site studies and bring us into our site approaches.
Hi, everybody. I hope everyone had good holidays. It was a long time. Okay, so we're gonna talk about site studies and try to pick up where we left off. So I'm gonna do a little bit of a review of what we saw last time, since it was a while ago, and then dive into some new material. So, as you might recall, we had 3 approaches to using the property that Cleveland High School and Portland Public Schools owns. The first was keeping all the major programs on one property, this current block, while we continue to utilize the track and field site for athletics with upgrades and improvements, and operationally use Powell Park for some athletics activities. And primarily keeping the existing parking lot as parking with some upgrades. This is an approach that we're continuing to study, and you'll see a couple of options that relate to this deployment of property, use of property. The second approach was to decant, if you will, some of the program for the main block onto the parking lot block. And the major program that we saw that's feasible to do so with that is the theater and performing arts programs. In that case, we would continue to do upgrades to the athletic site with the track and field on it, continue to operationally use Powell Park, and accept that we will not very likely, we won't be able to shut down Southeast 26th Avenue to car traffic. So in this case, our assumption is that we will try to do some improvements on grade on street level for crossing for students, and do a sky bridge between the 2 different program elements in 2 buildings. In this case also, there would be reduced parking because we are using the current parking lot for building. The third site, which we didn't get to talk about as much last time because we sort of ran out of time a little bit, we wanted to make sure we touched on this time, was an approach that was a little bit more out of the box and thinking about using the current track and field site for the modernized Cleveland High School, and then relocating the track and field to other locations. We talked about it a bit last time, but I want to make sure we close the loop on this, is that we did a lot of testing of moving the track and field to Powell Park, and it does not fit, and also is not owned by Portland Public Schools. And it also does not fit on this existing block, even if we were to demolish the building and sort of swap sites. Even if we have a compromised shape and sort of ideal setup for the track and field, it still doesn't fit on that property. So that really puts us in a position where this approach to using the sites and moving a new Cleveland High School to the track and field site is just not a viable option. I think internally within PPS, there's been discussions of whether we could do this or not, and really at the end of the day, it came down to every high school has a dedicated track and field associated with the school, and it's not a feasible option for us to go down a road where we don't have the track and field for use by Cleveland students. So you will not see any more developed approaches that take this approach. Okay, and in those first 2 approaches that we talked about that we continue to develop for this meeting, you'll see that consistently we are making improvements to the track and field site, which includes leaving the existing field and track with modest improvements to those facilities, and then additions of potentially tennis courts, more tennis courts, a formal entry and plaza for games, a field house, improvements to grandstands, very minimal parking that isn't intended for spectators but more for event staff, loading and unloading and those sorts of things. So that it's a little bit more formal than what's happening currently. And then there should be some extra space to use as flexible green space, either as practice space or batting cages, or a lot of the details of this would be worked out in future phases, but this gives us a good understanding of kind of what's possible and get into some sort of budget numbers so we understand what's feasible. Okay, so that was a little bit of review, and now we're gonna get into more detailed site layout options. So to review what Abby was sort of hinting at earlier, our real focus today is to look at really two major decisions that PPS is gonna have to make, and we need this group's input on. The first one is, should we retain the 1929 sort of most historic part of Cleveland High School building right now, or should we not? And the second question is, should we build on one property or two properties? Should we cross 26 with the building? So those are the two questions that we really need to answer at this point in the process. There's gonna be lots more decisions and lots more fun design opportunities to get into, but we really need to make these decisions early so that we can just sort of get through that threshold and really focus our efforts moving forward. So you're gonna see 4 conceptual options. They're still not quite buildings, but they're a little bit more detailed than what we looked at last time. Each approach of the 4 approaches we think can be super experientially rich, can be great space, and can be a cohesive campus. And we think that all of them will improve safety around all of the properties for Cleveland High School. So that's a baseline, and we're only showing you things that fit within that understanding. But we will have choices to make, and depending on our answers to these questions, there will be impacts to the balance between open space and parking. There will be impacts to the balance of how the EdSpec program for the high school fits into the existing building or a new purpose-built structure, which sometimes can have an impact on the scale or shape of spaces and their function, primarily about the existing building fitting into the existing building. And then if we decide to retain the 1929 building or not, we will be making a decision and coming to a commentary about the social narrative around preservation, and how we feel about that and what the function of the building is in the community. And then there will be some decisions that even at this early stage that we're making that impact the overall trajectory of the sustainability of the project. This isn't the be-all and end-all decision about sustainability on the project, but it is something that is important, is understanding the embodied carbon around decisions of keeping existing buildings or building new. So that's what we're gonna talk about for the rest of it. So I'll just reinforce that big decisions we need to make today are, not today, but we need to get your input on so that we can move forward productively, is retaining the 1929 building or not, and building on a property or two. Any questions right now before I go? Oh, can folks hand out this pen? So we have, this is a matrix of 4 options, and I'll go through each of them in depth after this slide. But you'll get a little page that you can make notes on for each of them. It's the same material that you're looking at up here. So what you're looking at is 4 options that try to play out the relationship between those 2 big decisions, okay? So across the top, options 1 and 2, use one property, use this main block for all of the program for Cleveland High School. Site option 1, so that's this one, right? So the parking lot stays largely as it is, option 1 and option 2. Thank you. That's better. Okay. Sorry if I'm going in and out. Okay, so site 1, or options 1 and 2, both are consolidated onto one property. Below, options 3 and 4 span over 26 with the Sky Bridge and move the performing arts and theater to the parking lot site, while also kind of fitting in about half to a third of the amount of parking that is there currently. And then if we go in the other direction, these left-hand options retain the existing 1929 Cleveland High School building in this light gray right here. Whereas the ones on the right or all new construction. So you can see how these 4 options try to put those 2 decisions into a matrix of options. So you can see their impacts on each other and how the 2 decisions kind of come together, or work against each other, or different ways of looking at the project.
Are they the same number of stories in either new build or, if you're adding a story to the 22-29 building, or you're just building a 3-story building?
They're effectively, yes, the same size. There's a little bit more height in this one, stepped back from the street, and a little less height in this one, but it's a very minimal difference. I would say it's not a large differentiator between
Same
the
amount of
options.
floor area?
Same floor area, both achieve the ed spec, high school, same size overall amount of building. Okay? And they're not designed, yeah.
I do want to clarify, we are assuming that there would be some additional square footage in an option that keeps the existing building, because of the existing building is less efficient in how the space is organized. So it's not kind of a 1-for-1 square footage change. So we were thinking maybe another 10,000 square feet on top of, the base amount. So, if we keep it this way.
And we'll go through each option in much detail, but if there's overall questions.
Is a facadectomy considered keeping a building or not keeping a building? Where's that fall?
Great question. We'll touch on this a little bit later, but my brief answer will be that we looked at a range of building reuse options, including a facadectomy, which is what you're referring to, is just basically keeping the skin of a historic building and rebuilding new inside. Versus what we're showing in these options, which is effectively keeping the outer bay of classrooms with upgrades, but keeping them structurally. The reason that we're articulating it this way in these options is because in discussions with structural engineers and our construction consultants and our cost consultants, just keeping the face of the building was sort of the, I don't want to say the worst, but the most challenging of all options. From a cost perspective, it was the most expensive option. From a constructability perspective, it had the most risk. So it's not something that felt like it held value as a way forward.
So what Benson is doing just really wouldn't work for what we would do here, as far as the value to the effect of it, essentially. So
I'm not familiar enough with Benson to
Okay.
know where it falls
I
along
think
the
that was hard to
spectrum.
say.
Yeah, Benson was just the 1-story, like the warehouse portion,
Uh-huh.
was much, it's a difference if you do it for 1 story versus 3 stories. Once we are so tall, bracing the whole facade for doing construction becomes really expensive. So
Okay.
Benson was a little bit different, was a little bit more economical, yeah.
That's a good, that's
Yeah, that
that's
is
a
the
good-
difference between, yeah.
Basically,
Okay.
to keep the face of the building, you have to build a temporary building to
Yeah.
keep it up.
Yeah.
And then build the permanent building and then get rid of the temporary building, so.
Well, when we were looking at the chart, the community likes it, but the community's gonna see the outside more often than not, and it's, that was the compromise of like, oh, we get new inside and keep the old for the community to sort of enjoy more than anything else. But that's what I wanted to clarify.
And as Abby indicated, there's different users, different stakeholders in this process have different relationship to the school, different perspectives, and we have to kind of weigh that all.
Sure.
Yeah.
I believe Benson though didn't just keep the facade, did they? I mean, they kept actually some.
They
Yeah, in the
very
back,
large
so
amount
the
of
back area with all the CTC spaces, they kept the 1-story existing facade, and the front, they kept the most of the main building, yes, you're right, correct. So
Yeah, they
there's
did
two
both.
different approaches.
And we couldn't, we can go, kind of as we design, decide exactly how much of, if we keep the existing building, how much of it is kept. Anything that's kept is gonna be gutted and completely sort of rebuilt. I think maybe the thing to keep in mind is this left-hand column, keeping that 1929 facade fixes a certain relationship on the site, because those facades don't move. So if you kept the facade, plus or minus the building behind it, they're gonna be set back the way they're set back, they're gonna be the height they are, so we'll talk a little bit more about that relationship as we go forward.
Great, thank you.
Does that include like the quality and amounts of outdoor space?
We'll get into that.
Okay.
Yeah, great question, and all these things we'll touch on, maybe as we move forward, we can touch on that. So basic strategy is, again, 2 decisions, do we keep the existing building or not, and do we build on two sites or?
It looks like in all the schemes, the existing theater's been removed. Is that a decision that was made, or?
Yeah, great question, because we didn't really, we forgot to touch on that in the engagement section. We have not represented the existing theater staying. I think that others can add to this, but my summary would be that we heard pretty clear feedback in all of the different stakeholder groups that we heard from so far, that there's not a very large push to keep the existing theater, that when we gave trade-offs, that the theater was not, retaining the existing theater was not rising to the top of those trade-offs when compared to other focuses. So we talked internally with PPS and decided that that was a sort of, I wouldn't say decision, but we were not gonna further study retaining it. Because we have to, iterate and move forward, and that didn't feel like it was gaining a lot of traction after we dug into it and tried to provide people with good information.
Will we cover costs? Like, I know it's not hard costs, but generally it's, we have more money to work with if we tear it down and build it when we do the structure, or if keeping part of it adds to the cost. Will we discuss that?
I would say that, although we have looked at pretty detailed numbers, they're at a pretty high level of input detail to get to those numbers. And overall, it's kind of a wash. Like, it's not the cost difference between retaining existing and going new is not substantially going to impact the decision. It's not a hugely weighted, it's so much cheaper to keep the existing building, or it's so much cheaper to do new construction. And that is primarily because even in when we retain the existing, 2/3 of the total high school will still be new construction. Because the school is getting bigger and there's only a portion of the existing construction.
Right, I would think
that's
it's cheaper to start from scratch. That's why I asked if
That's
we would
certainly
benefit in other
conventional
ways
wisdom.
by not keeping it.
Yeah, it is a little bit cheaper to do the construction.
What about speed of construction? Which is faster?
I would say speed of construction will be faster with new construction is our assumption right now. And risk mitigation, if we start from the perspective of all new construction, we have less potential surprises. So that's a broad statement with where we are in the process, but it is generally holds true.
You will touch on, the thing that does start to change the cost model is building on two sites. That adds some complexity both from a cost standpoint and potentially from a time standpoint.
So maybe we'll get into individuals and we can touch on some of those things. Okay, so this is the first site approach. So again, this is Powell right here, 26, the existing parking lot with upgrades. And then the existing 1929 historic building with new construction, gray. And then the orange is the gymnasiums and some athletics related program. And then the purple is theater and performing arts. Again, these are not quite buildings yet, but they're a little bit more of a scale breakdown than what we looked at last time.
How many parking spaces are after site improvement?
It's more than we expected. We thought we were gonna lose quite a few parking spaces, and it's pretty much on par with losing a couple spots.
Yeah, let's just say around 100.
Around 100? And then how many staff on average in the building at any given time? 130. 130. Okay.
And the existing parking is about 116, 117,
Okay.
something like that.
Does that count the back?
No.
No, it does not. It's just,
Yeah,
it
there's
just counts the
14
main
more.
lot right now.
Back.
Yeah.
There.
To be honest, we thought we were gonna get down to like 50, so we were really happy.
That's more than Lincoln.
Yeah, it is considerable.
What's the grade block on top of the gym?
Good question. It's a placeholder for what we think is probably some significant mechanical equipment that will be needed in the electrification process. It's gonna drive some of our systems choices, which means we have a little bit of that kind of support space that we just wanna represent on some level as part of the mass.
And the gyms and all of these it's two gyms then?
Yeah, correct, it's two gyms. Yeah, we have decisions to make down the line about whether they're connected and such.
Sorry, other question.
Same one.
Okay, and maybe you're going into this, but I do know that this group voted pretty heavily for just outdoor space for the kids. are you getting into roughly how much is available? Okay.
Yeah,
Yeah, we'll have some
Okay.
slides.
Yeah, we'll quantify it in another section, we'll talk explicitly about open space, but, so, this is that first option still, just seeing it from a different angle, so looking at it from kind of the neighborhood side of 28th and Franklin. And it gives you some sense of outdoor space here and here. Now, you can see the impact of keeping the existing building just drive the shape and location of open space and other elements. Let me go through these and then I'll circle back, is that okay? Okay. So, this option preserves the existing historic frontage and setbacks along 26, which, I'm not gonna use the word guarantee, but makes it more likely that we can retain the existing trees, that are there. The, theater and performing arts is kind of anchored in the neighborhood at 28th and Franklin, sort of where the current gym is. About 2/3, as I noted earlier, of the construction here is new versus renovation. And this option has sort of the smallest open space potential, and it's likely divided into two parts or shaped in a very particular way, given some of the existing elements and sort of competing needs for ground floor space. So, and again, it's the same size building, 300,000 square feet plus.
But slightly larger, we say, because of.
Yeah, yeah, when we get into it, kind of the next phase, we'll probably find that any option with the existing building staying will be a little bit more overall square footage, and what we mean by that is because, like Eric said, the fit between the shape and scale of the existing building and the ideal size and shape of the spaces it should contain in a modernized high school isn't always a perfect fit. So we alluded to this last time when we were talking about classroom size and shape. Right now, Cleveland High School's classrooms in this outer bar are very small. They're much smaller than the ed spec suggests. They will need to grow. So how we grow those, we have some options, but it means that they will probably become longer rooms rather than bigger squares, if you will. They're squares right now. So it means that there might be a little bit of compromises about the ideal shape and function of those spaces. Okay, some people have questions.
So the main entrance is staying in the same spot as it is now in this?
Great question. We are not making any assumptions about entry right now, because that is a really big question. And the only thing I'll say about it, I think at this point, I think I can say, is that the current existing historic entry will likely not remain the new entry in a modernized high school. A lot of that is about the stairs, which makes access very difficult. And we've heard a lot of feedback already about sort of the distance between the front door and the sidewalk is not a lot to absorb the inflow and outflow of students. And there's safety concerns on 26, so very likely we will be looking at moving the entry. But that decision, I would say, is like kind of a secondary decision to those big decisions we have to make. And we see a lot of options for how that could happen.
So in this one where we maintain partial building, the classrooms and rooms that are on the inner circle, are they being demolished for the new construction?
Correct. It would effectively be a inner ring
Yeah.
of new classrooms to supplement the classrooms that can fit into the existing structure. And then extended learning spaces, other programs.
A lot
So they're
like, if
really-
you went to Grant, it's a lot like that, where instead of a double loaded corridor, it now is a single loaded corridor of older classrooms
Okay.
and new addition on the other side.
But I mean, I guess the way I'm looking at it, though, is that there's even less of the original building that's really being retained, even in this scenario.
It's about 100,000 square feet.
Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah.
Oh.
It's about
Okay.
1/3 of the total square footage. It might seem a little misleading here because these are very high volume spaces, so they don't contain the same number of floors for athletics and theater as the gray block does effectively. So when we look at square footage versus volume,
That makes
it's,
sense.
yeah. Does that make sense, Dylan?
Is there a height implication if you're keeping partial versus building new? Like, is this assumed to be 4 stories?
This is assumed to be 5, because the existing is 3. So it's sort of to get the square footage, you wind up having a combination of 5 and 3.
Yeah.
Whereas with the new construction, you could also do that very much, and, you know, we're not there yet, but, there could be more consistency at say 4 stories. So that's why I kind of hedged a little bit when the question was held here.
This is kind of a random question, but it's about aesthetics. So like, is there any thought process around if you keep the historic part of the building, like, what's the rest of the building look like? Is it historic looking? Is it modern looking?
That is a great question, and I'm gonna table that for a little bit later in the discussion, if that's okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Alright, so I'm gonna try to go through these a little bit at a clip here, just with timing, and then kind of circle back. If you're legitimately like confused about what you're looking at, definitely. Okay, so this is the second option. So, as opposed to keeping the existing building and consolidating all program on one site, the second option remains consolidated on one site, but is all new construction, does not retain the existing building. So in this case, both the theater and performing arts, as well as the athletics and gymnasium, remain on the main site, everything co-located. It's the same size building as, it was actually a little smaller, I guess, overall, but the same ed spec building as the previous option, because we can be really efficient with new construction, and how we fit everything into this building is purpose-built. We're not trying to find the right fit between an existing space and an ideal form. So this is, again, from the other view from Southeast 28th and Franklin. You can start immediately looking at things like open space, and seeing that once we are working with new construction, we have a little bit more control over the position, size, shape, etc. of open space on the site. We can also control the relationship between the edge of the building and the edge of the site here. We do have some minimum setbacks that we're working with, but in this rendition, we are working with the minimum setbacks. We're not setting back any more than we're required to from the street. So the building will be closer to the sidewalk edge than the current building. What the trade-off for that is that we can put that open space that is currently sort of ringing the outside of the building and take that square footage and move it to an interior courtyard. So again, this new building is a little bit more efficient in organizing space, with more control not only of the shape of the open space, but shape of classrooms and spaces within. We consider this sort of like a medium-sized open space in this option. Okay, option 3. We're going back to keeping the existing building in this option, but instead of trying to get everything on one site, we're moving the performing arts and the theater across 26. You can see some parking here associated with the whole school, but kind of ringing around the performing arts. This is right around number 40. Took my down. You know, how many parking spaces is this?
I think it was about 55.
Oh, okay, here, okay. In this option, again, we still have the gymnasium athletics probably trended towards the east side of the site to relate to Waverly and the fields. You can see a sky bridge represented here. We'll talk about the sky bridge more, but effectively to meet the requirements for 26th Avenue, the sky bridge would have to be at what is effectively a 3rd floor level. So that's where we connect in any case. There's the sky bridge. The sky bridge is something that we see as inherently connected to building on this lot because of the safety concerns that we've heard. We've already started talking to the city about the feasibility of the sky bridge. In simple form, I'd say that we think that we have a compelling case to get a sky bridge approved, but it is not guaranteed by any means. So I think it's a fair assessment. So that's just something we want people to be aware of, is that it's not something we just get to do by right. It is something that we have to prove the need for, and it's not necessarily an easy, predictable threshold to meet.
Would it be an enclosed sky bridge or open?
Yes, our assumption is that it's enclosed. It may or may not be thermally heated and cooled, but it is enclosed, dry, and not open on the sides.
Because of what you just said about your negotiations or concerns about Skybridge, and you were very frank, it's not guaranteed. The last meeting we had in this room, there were a core group of people who had been told that Franklin was going to be widened. Hear me out. Franklin was going to be widened, and that there was a chance that the school district and or city would allow some eminent domain with our neighbors across the street.
To take their property or to take Cleveland?
No, to take their property.
Oh.
So I went, I'm not gonna identify who the person is. I went and, because I was shocked, okay? I went and I asked the question, and I was told, absolutely not. That would not be in the purview of any of this. But my concern is that this was such a very vehement, vocal expression. I am concerned that that's out there as a part of somebody's mind that, oh yes, this is gonna be ideal because Franklin will be bigger. We don't have to worry about our neighbors and what their property looks like and their upkeep and their landscaping and the fact that that's what we will be looking at. So now I've said this out loud, and I'm concerned about that, especially in light of the February 3 community meeting, because I think stuff that we're hearing, or that you guys are hearing, obviously, that is like that is so far out of proportion of reality, somehow we're at the point where we're gonna nip some of this in the bud. Okay, that's all I wanna say.
Thank you for
Thank you.
sharing, Jan, because actually the team, we didn't hear that. So we're all looking at each other like, this is the first time we're hearing that.
Well, somebody here
conversation, so.
heard me talk to them about it, but it's okay.
Yeah.
I just wanted to be absolutely sure that I hadn't missed something. Because that would be an intriguing prospect if all of a sudden we had eminent domain and we had a wider Franklin.
I mean, that does come up in conversations with the community because the government has that ability. I don't know if the district would ever attempt that.
I can't imagine, but anyway, okay.
And it doesn't come up, at least in our planning efforts, as
Right.
ever any of an option for anything.
Right, that's
So,
just why I wanted to get it out there. Thank you.
thanks.
Thank you though, because we do appreciate getting the word stuff and the information, because part of our job here is to kind of separate out, fact and fiction and everything. And with an understanding that, like, we're all people, we just hear things and have opinions and everything, and that's okay, like, to just put it out there. And what we wanna do is our responsibility is to dig in, find the information, help report back out, so that you have good information to go on, and so that all of you can remain kind of ambassadors for the project and help people understand the context, because we're not gonna see some of these people at drop off and pick up and everything else, and you are in this community in a different way than we are, and you can help the project by kind of getting the facts out there.
Please ignore the label on top of Amanda which says fiction.
What is it?
On top.
Oh. So, with your statement about the Sky Bridge, at what point in this process, right, that we're supposed to be coming to a close in the next few months for proposal, when will you know if that is a possibility? Because I mean, you approve, say, this particular plan, and then, in 3 years, when you go to build, they're like, well, actually, you can do this, but you can't put the Sky Bridge in.
What I can say is that it won't be 3 years that we find out the answer. It will be sooner than that. But there is, quite a process to go through to get that approval.
Is it within this planning?
The first
No.
step will be, doing a pre-application meeting with the city, which we are scheduling for a few weeks from now. And so we will be able to nothing that happens at that meeting is guaranteed, but, we'll have a sort of initial ideas. The main thing about Skybridge is it involves city council approval. So, we would probably work with the district, if that was the direction people wanted to go, to get in front of city council much sooner than later and make sure that was
I
a
mean,
path.
I can't imagine. I don't know, like, as a citizen and as a parent, I can't imagine someone saying, no,
Yeah.
the school shouldn't have this guy, you know what I mean? Like, that's just in my mind, but, you know.
So again, we can like get into the sky bridge more. I would say that it would probably be hard for us to have a solid answer by the end of this period, but we're gonna do the best we can in this planning process to understand it. But I will add that, Pip, I think we'll talk about later the sky bridge in more detail, and I would say that approvability is not the only aspect to be considering about the sky bridge. Where we are right now does it hold enough value? And is it something we want to pay for instead of paying for something else? And does it inherently fix something that we can't do by keeping everything on the same site? Right, so is it worth fighting for? Right, is just to simplify it, is I see some heads shaking up and down, but so I think that's where our sort of duty is at this point in the process is there enough value? Is it an essential element that we can't live without because of X, Y, and Z?
Two questions. I know you said that structured parking would be a lot more expensive and therefore like a huge trade-off, but what about tuck under? Has that been an option potentially to
Yeah.
to that 55 spots?
We're sort of balancing right now, kind of staying up here and being really in the weeds, right, cost-wise. So we have gone through that exercise of looking at full underground parking, you know, with building above. We've looked at just surface level improvements like the previous options here, and then we've looked at these sort of partial lots distributed, and then we've also looked at tuck under parking, like in this case, you know, maybe here, and then the building gets taller, kind of thing. And what we found is that we throw out some really rough numbers, because they were mentioned earlier, but, you know, improving a parking lot is $1 million, $2 million, somewhere in that. This is less parking, so it's less, right? Because it's fundamentally similar to a surface lot. To do a tuck under, or to do completely underground parking was like 16 million at the rough order of magnitude scale. To do tuck under was 12. So not much of a difference, right? And when we think about the trade-off between $12 million and what you could do in the main building for programming, that's a pretty big thing. So, you know, we have made some decisions in the background about value for the school and PPS, and only presented the options that seem to fit within the worldview that we've heard in the trade-offs that we heard.
And just a second question, just about the sky bridge, like, you said the 26 can never be shut down, et cetera, but it just maybe it's more of a question to principal, like, I know there's been this whole committee that's been meeting with PBOD and ODOT and advocates, and it's like, you know, this is a very hazardous area, and so, did that committee say 100% that would never happen? Or is that?
spot that's housing this, or is it
I'm just gonna speak up and just say, we were told pretty explicitly that 26 will not be closed. It is one of the collector streets, kind of in the neighborhood.
That's what came out of our, yes.
Yeah.
I'm not shutting 26 down.
Yeah. And I'm gonna again reorient us and say that we can go down the kind of rabbit hole of details on any one of these particular decisions, but where we are today in the process is about finding value, right? And I would say that going across 26 means that we really have to be careful about children crossing the street, right? Because program is on the other side. If we go to an option where things are consolidated, there is less pressure on interaction between students during the school day on 26, because they're not crossing 26 for programming during the school day, right? So we can solve a problem in multiple ways.
But it can also be build it and they will come, like maybe if you built it, then PBOT can rethink what they're, because I mean, they shut Times Square, everyone said it couldn't be done. So you never know what can be done.
I'm gonna take one more question and then we're gonna move on.
Yeah, I've been up for quite a while.
I don't think he's spoken.
I just wanna go back, before you talk about adding value, where's the value of the bridge? And I think one of the things about Cleveland that I've always felt is it doesn't have a moment. You know, it's hidden in the trees, it's on the corner. Drive by Franklin, you see it, you drive by Grant, other schools. This would give an iconic moment to Cleveland where it defines a school. So I think it goes beyond the simple logistics of moving people to being the feature. That's the gateway. That's the thing you pass under conflict. You're at Cleveland when you're there. You see it from everywhere. So I think there's some importance there that shouldn't be forgotten.
Absolutely, I think there's a lot of opportunity and a lot of the potential of the options here, including the Skybridge. And I can say, for the design team, that their Skybridge, it would be very beautiful. So, and I'll also say that if we have $8 million, maybe the Skybridge, $12 million it might cost, we could also use that to make some very iconic moments in the rest of the building, even if it is not a Skybridge. I'm gonna,
Just real
last
quick,
one.
okay. I'm a little confused on like the conversation around like budget though, because from my understanding, like $12 million could just be part of the bid that we put in for the bond, right? Like maybe it's a $350 million project, or maybe it's a $362 million project, and like, so I've heard a few
Yeah.
things about.
I mean, I'll start and answer, because I think you're not wrong, right? I mean, we are in a unique moment where we have not been given a hard number to be designing to at this point. So, it is shades of gray on some level, but what I'll say on behalf of the district would be that, one, we have two projects going concurrently, and we need to, there's gonna be some level of parity or consistency between them. And, so we need to be careful about where we're spending dollars between projects.
Do you mean IB wells?
Yeah.
IB wells, yes, sorry, I should be explicit. But even more so than that, again, there's not hard answers here, but we need the voters to approve this, right? And so we just need to be making smart decisions that increase the value and reduce the risk for the project, that make a great high school for Cleveland. Right, so we're gonna do our best with our construction experience and design experience and approvals from the city experience to just give you like the honest answer about where some of those things fall. And we wanna position your community to get approved, right? So that you get a new modernized Cleveland high school as soon as possible, which means that we just need to not throw caution to the wind on all of the decisions that relate to cost, or we're gonna get down the line to a point and have to backtrack. So we're just trying to be really careful and real with everyone about making sure we understand implications.
I'm gonna bring up the bridge one more time, because I wanna think of something that I don't know that we're all thinking about. And you're talking about a connection to a building, and the idea to keep students off the street. Our students cross that street for many reasons, and it wouldn't be just for a building. So I wanna know that it wouldn't be just to go to a building. It would be allow them to get to a bus stop, it would be allow them to get lunch, and anywhere else they would have to go. It would not, I know it's third floor level, so we can build it, and it does not mean they would utilize it. Because our kids are about quick.
I'm gonna repeat that so
we're
we
in-
can get in the record, because I think it's a
We're
really
in this
important.
building all day long, and we know that our kids and even our staff are about quick.
Let's ask these guys. You're on the ground floor.
That's right.
And you can cross.
So I'm gonna
the
repeat
street,
that
you got
comment,
three
and then I'm gonna
stories
move on to the
across.
fourth option,
That's fine.
is that, my summary is that we, one, need to be careful that we're prioritizing safety and improved safe crossing of 26th Avenue, regardless of building across the street or not, or Skybridge or not, because the kids arriving at the beginning of the day, going to lunch, et cetera, are still interfacing with the cars that are still gonna be there, and we hear you 100% on that. And then what you also added was that because the Skybridge is on the third floor, and maybe even if it was on the second floor, the fact that if a student or staff member is on the ground floor and needs to get to the ground floor of the building across the street, even if a Skybridge exists, they're very likely to take the path of least resistance, which is crossing 26th.
How does your design in the building make it interesting to wanna go to the third floor?
Yeah.
Talk about that.
100%. Okay, so the last approach is, again, all new construction, but moving performing arts to the other side of the street. So a lot of the same issues here, that in this option, it is the most open space and the most flexibility on the main lot of any of the other options. because basically that performing arts footprint now becomes whatever we want it to become the main site. Again, new building is a bit more efficient than the existing building with proportion of spaces and kind of tight fit. But as Abby indicated earlier, overall from a cost perspective, building on 2 sites is always going to be a bit more expensive than building on 1 site. So when I say that, I'm gonna go to here and say that from a big picture cost perspective, building on a consolidated site is going to be less expensive than building on a distributed site, 2 sites. And roughly building new construction is going to be a little bit cheaper than reusing the existing building. Pretty much. All right, I'm gonna go and say, now that I've taken up all of them, I want to remind everyone that our big decisions for today, even though we can absolutely jump into the weeds on a lot of things, is there a value in retaining the 1929 historic building or not? And is there enough value in building on 2 sites rather than 1?
I feel like I have a statement that needs to be heard. I'm the band director.
Okay.
So we're talking about safety, right? I have 150 kids that needs to get from the band room to the football field. Where would you like that band room to be? Across 26th or on the same side as the football field? I'm just gonna put that out there.
I'm gonna repeat that. Band teacher is saying that the proximity between the fields down Waverly to the east of our main building and the main campus is key for band. Students, about 150 students, and a suggestion that having it over 26 on the west side of the site puts it further than potentially it could be or should be.
Safety.
From the,
Safety.
and that safety is a big, big
150
concern.
kids across 26.
There's a lot of challenges. These are hard things, and we're really thankful for your input. Okay, we are gonna talk about some of the issues that you brought up, and Luke is gonna kind of go through how we create a cohesive campus in any of these 4 options.
Can I ask a quick question? Sorry. With the 2 sites, like building on 2 sites, would that add time too, because there's no like staging area? You have to like move things around?
No containers.
The answer is probably. Our initial thought was that it might delay some of the completion of the performing arts theater later than the rest of the project because of the kind of use of sites. But we are working through potential approaches to mitigate that or make it less of an issue. There are some cost implications to, that's part of the cost of building on another site is figuring out those logistics and just more, hours.
All right, well, hi everyone. My name is Luke Smith. I am an architect with the Cleveland design team, and you just had a lot of information thrown at you, and you're probably still digesting that, but I'm gonna ask you to step back and not really think about any of that for about, it was gonna be 7 seconds, but now it's probably gonna be about 45 seconds. We're going to go over some bigger design ideas. So this is an introduction into talking about design language and how we can take some of our initial goals. If you remember Abby talking about some of the project goals, vision goals for the project, and turning that, synthesizing it into some design moves that we can look at to help accomplish our goals. So it comes from it being an aspiration to something that is actually built in real life and can help facilitate some of these ideas. So let's go through them. So the first one we're going to talk about here is the idea of creating a signaling entrance, looking at the entrance to the school, what makes that visually identifiable. Here is kind of a study looking at overhangs on buildings, whether we are actually using the mass of the building to create a shelter to signify that's an area that students can enter, or alternatively looking at a built structure that is exterior to the building like a pavilion or a canopy, and having that be kind of a primary feature for students to enter. Many of you went on the tour of Grant and Lincoln and
and there were a lot of comments about kind of the procession through the space as you entered, looking from the street, going all the way into the main building. So we are looking really closely at creating a human scale entry sequence. This is a diagram kind of looking at the different parts and pieces that add together to make what is considered like a successful experience. You know, and Grant has a very kind of long one from the street with a lot of green space, and then a threshold you walk through, whereas Lincoln's a more concise one because of the way the site's shaped. So there are ways to accomplish this on any of the schemes. And I should maybe take a step back and say that all of these are applicable for all the schemes we just talked about. So this is not exclusive to any of the site options you just saw, but these are the types of experiences that we're trying to make in the new Cleveland High School. Creating an active space, looking at how if we take a tall building, do we make it feel dynamic and active on different levels? Looking at taking double height spaces and mixing them up on different levels. Maybe you put it on the roof and there is rooftop space that could be used as an active space or a breakout space for students. Maybe you put it halfway up the building and that becomes perhaps a library or some space for students to gather and have views out over the neighborhood. Or maybe it's on the ground floor and that becomes, you know, an entrance or a common space, a cafeteria perhaps. There is a decent amount of grade change on the site, which I'm not sure how much we've talked about yet, but there's 20 feet between Southeast 26th Avenue and Southeast 28th. So we would be looking at how we can kind of use that to our advantage and mitigate some of that grade change by having perhaps a double height space on the ground floor that has an active zone outside of it, and then having clerestory windows. Like you can imagine perhaps that being like a gym or something, or using just a single height basement that has actually windows on one side, kind of like a daylit basement. If you look on the right here, some examples of that. In the northeast, the upper right corner, there's a field that is a spill out space for grants, a very similar condition, that actually kind of allows this basement level to have daylight. Looking at connections and safety, a lot of comments tonight about safety crossing the street and safety kind of moving through the site. So this is an exploration looking at what those spaces are going to be like, how can we make that a continuous experience through the site and not just kind of a single moment. The idea of designing something that is desirable to walk through and actually makes sense. I think we've heard that just now, and would be something that students would utilize and could, above all else, be safe and easy to use. And then finally looking at the historic reuse of the building, lots of different ways to accomplish this. These two diagrams kind of speak to the idea of renovating an existing structure versus keeping just the skin, the facadectomy, which sounds like, you know, the schemes that we're exploring are more the one on top versus down below. And then also, what does it mean to have an old building next to a new building, and what does that look like? Is it you know, a replication of the older building? Is it modern? How are these two buildings in dialogue? So if we go down this route, this will be something we'll be exploring and taking very seriously and be getting your input on. And that's it.
All right. Thank you. I am Elisa Laverne, for those of you who might not remember, and I'm just going to really quickly clip through some thoughts on site connection. And this is information that we have talked about in the past and that folks have asked about. I just want to let everyone know that we have dug in, we have been talking with our engineers, we've been talking with the city to really understand how we can move some of this forward and what that might look like. So just as an overview, we do obviously have a campus that is contained on 3 individual sites. So as we take a look at that, we really want to think about how we can improve the safety of connecting between those sites. So both safety for the students and staff to get to the field, as well as crossing 26th and also Powell. So as we were taking a look at this, we really started to look at 26 Powell, that 28th and Waverly, and are looking at those grade level crossings that we had talked about, the Sky Bridge connections across 26, and there was questions about whether that could also happen across Powell, and then questions about is it possible to actually go below grade and tunnel through to make those connections. So just to show, as we are looking at that site connection to get us over to the field, there is some improvements that we're certainly looking at, and those are happening at any time that we are looking at crossing a street, is where we're really focusing on wanting to make those improvements. So we see at 28th, there's an opportunity to do some improvements so there is no right turn in on that street. And then again, taking a look at the drops that happen along that sidewalk. There's a question, is there potential to improve the sidewalks? But I think all of this is stuff that we can take a look at, but it's really gonna be about the trade-offs as we look at this project holistically and all of the things that we want to do. So as we take a look at 26 and crossing the street there at the surface level, we know that we can pretty easily do that at Franklin. We have also talked about the potential of a mid-street crossing at the center. And we know that these are both possibilities, and we can improve those crossings with the Hawkeye signals, with the ADA access ramps, with a refuge median to help slow traffic or have a spot for folks to rest. And that can happen at either of those locations. So I think what's really gonna drive that is where, as we start to develop the building, understanding where the entry is, that the crossing can certainly happen at 26, improvement at street level. So then we talked about the bridge and taking a look, if we have any program that sits across 26, we have said that we will have a bridge. PPS feels that in terms of safety, that would be required. So we are saying with a program that sits across 26, a bridge would be included. And here, as Amanda talked about, that bridge would be covered, it would be enclosed, and it would be potentially an active space. We can see a couple of examples here of what that might look like. Again, it does require city council approval. It's not guaranteed. We talked about it connecting at that third floor. So these are all things that we need to take into consideration as we move forward. We see also along the bottom the cost there. There's obviously the cost of building that bridge. So then the crossing at Powell, and actually taking a look at a bridge that spans over Powell. What we found is that based on the site and the grades there, that we would actually, once we crossed over, would need to drop about 50 feet to get us to grade. So there are some safety considerations to take into account. You're not connecting directly to a building. You would be coming down at grade. And how do you manage that door? Obviously, the costs here are very high. We would be spanning over state highway, which is very difficult considering the 26th, we would be also having some challenges there. And then again, that requirement and approval from city council as well as from ODOT now. And then we wanted to take that final look to really consider, is it possible to go below grade? Is this something that we could make happen? And talking with our civil engineers and really understanding where utilities currently exist in the street, we would have to go down 2 levels below the basement level in order to get across. So as we can imagine, there would be quite a bit of cost incurred there, as well as some safety considerations to think about. So we don't see this as a viable option, but did want to take a look at it because it was brought up. That, I'll pass it off to Renee.
Thank you, Lisa. And yeah, we'll be very brief because we really want you at the stations there to give us more feedback on these options. So this is an important section because it's about something that really doesn't exist right now on the site, open space. And we're gonna quickly go through the different options and the impact each of these design options or schemes has on open space. And what is better than maybe have a reference space for you to imagine what the scale of this is, because if I tell you, oh, that's 50,000 square feet, what does it really mean? So we have 2 examples for the option number 1, which is the existing building and everything consolidated on one site. We have an open space in the center of the building that is approximately 10,000 square feet, which is kind of, if you're familiar with Franklin High School, the historic entrance, that is approximately 9,000, approximately 10,000 square foot space. Or at Grant, only the turf field, which is only this area here, that is a 10,000 square foot open space. Going to the next one, which is consolidated on one site, but all new building, and you see now we have a little bit more space. We have approximately 17,000 square feet now of open space. And this is approximately comparable to the Kellogg Middle School Plaza. If you want to drive by and have a look, feel free.
See, it's on the back.
I know, it's kind of, yeah, you have to maybe sneak in and ask for permission. Not for principal, don't just say, I sent you. However, again, these are some of the trade-offs to consider. Again, but at the moment, there is no really quality open space on this campus. So, going to the next one, when we are looking at building on 2 sites, but maintaining the existing building, Amanda has mentioned that there are restrictions because we cannot really take advantage of the full site because the existing setbacks of the existing building still apply. And also what is actually one of the bigger factors is, Powell angles actually. And the existing building doesn't really account for that. So in this case, we're actually still only having a 17,000 square feet space. Again, everything is better than now, unfortunately. But we're building on 2 sites. And last but not least, of course, is the kind of the most efficient. This new building would be able to take advantage of the angle and Powell. So actually you could be wider, you have more space on site. This would be the largest space, and it's approximately could be the size of Director's Park in downtown Portland. So again, these are some things to consider because at the moment there is no open space on campus really. And this is when you think about the trade-off, when we're moving program off-site, we can accommodate more open space, which should be part of everyday student stay. Yeah.
On this larger open space, how is the perimeter secure? Would there be a fence or?
It will be secure. Yeah, these will be in the design that's going forward. Yes, we are assuming it will be secure.
But just
campus.
visualizing it,
And
comparing
yes.
it to Director's Park.
But it
it's
will
very
be a-
open. But this would be a caged, or not caged, but.
Well, I mean, again,
Metal fence.
it still depends because we had the same discussion as Grant, and the community in the end actually opted for totally open space. It is actually accessible to all. So I think these will be future considerations. First of all, for this moment, it matters, do you have even space to protect? At the moment, it's not even an issue, So anyway, I think, yeah, we now going to.
Yes, we have a
Yeah,
couple
well,
of
Chris,
speakers.
sorry, one more. This side.
I've got just a couple more to go through.
Yeah.
And Abby, I think you may have a couple as well. So back on the existing building, we've been continuing to study that, looking at classroom sizes. The ed spec says the classroom should be 980 square feet. I think there was some flexibility on that number at one point in thinking maybe more classrooms. If they're a little smaller, you could have more classrooms. At this point, I think PPS has decided that the real target should be around 980 square feet. As you know, the classrooms here at Cleveland most are very small. At the renovated Grant, we targeted the 790 square feet, and at Lincoln, 890 square feet. Average, or typical. And one more thing I'll point out in this picture is you can see the windows in the picture of Grant used to look exactly like the ones here. They probably were the same windows that we have here at Cleveland. They do let light much deeper into the space. So in looking at the ed spec, it does fairly efficiently lend itself to fitting over 900 square feet classrooms into the building. And I guess one thing, the location of the columns, which you can see sort of at the bottom of the upper drawing there, they would be in the classrooms, but I think they're far enough, near enough to the wall that they shouldn't impact view lines. The classrooms are longer and skinnier, which could present some issues. It does help with getting daylight deep into that space, which is more energy efficient and provides a better learning environment. So I think classrooms, administration, those types of uses could fit into the existing building much better than some of the more specialized spaces.
So this slide, just talking about the existing building, we have two slides to talk about its context. This one is more from a practical standpoint, so fit and scale. We talked about earlier, the existing building is where it is. That's not moving if it stays. So its relationship between its streets and the walls, where there's big trees, those sorts of things would remain. So we have noticed that this is the context the neighborhood has had for almost 100 years. People are fairly used to this 3-story building. They've built around it and been used to it. And if we retain it, it would remain where it is, and it would somewhat restrict what else happens on the site. As Renee was showing you get the smallest outdoor space when you retain the existing building and build on one site, because we end up with these extra areas of green outside the walls, if you will, that can't be consolidated to the inside. And we're more likely, we can't guarantee, we're more likely to keep more of the existing mature trees if we do keep the existing building, because again, of where it is. That if we build all new, the impetus is going to be to push out to the edges of the site, which would definitely take down trees. So we feel like there are just trade-offs in keeping the building that have to do with the site and the fit. And then the second topic is really more of the social narrative of keeping the existing building. We've talked about the fact that this is from 1929. It is in the classical revival style, which represents what was considered civic architecture at the time. It's a European notion of what schools look like. The design can also hold memory and nostalgia. It can be good memories, it can be less than good memories. And it can also represent the history and the power and the structures that were in place 100 years ago, and can have a negative impact on some people. Even the idea of walking up those big stairs has a negative impact on some people, especially if you can't walk up the stairs. So we're committing to, if we keep the building, even if we build a new building, we do have to think about what is the narrative of what is a school, what does a school look like, and what does it represent. So our takeaway here, the image on the right is actually from the PPS Long Range Facilities Plan, which has a 4th circle on it of planning principles, which we'll dig into as the design progresses. But these are ideas about how do we create welcomeness, and how do we kind of break down maybe the 1900s idea of power, identity, representation, etc. So something to think about, whether we keep the building or not. How do we reframe the narrative?
And just, we haven't given a lot of airtime to sustainability, but it's certainly a priority of ours, and we're thinking about it, so we wanted to make sure we brought it up at this point in the process. But you may be familiar with the PBS district policy, the Climate Crisis Response, Climate Justice, and Sustainable Practices Policy. That's a policy that was passed by the board that has, focuses on sort of the broad goals. It doesn't go into the details of how to design a building. Out of that came the newest PPS district energy and sustainability standards, which is what we're focusing on to make the operation of the building more efficient, to use less carbon as we as the building is used. You can see, we'll be doing that with the mechanical systems and those sorts of things. But on the right-hand side there is a graphic that shows an estimate when we go from the sort of code minimum for a high school is around 40 EUI, which is energy use intensity. We think we can do it in about 3/4 of that amount. So that would amount to 50, I'll just say, units of carbon. That is a very significant amount of energy savings over a 50-year period of operating the building. Comparing that then to embodied carbon, which is what we talk about with the materials that we use when we build buildings, or if a building's already built, that embodied carbon has already been used and is there. So we did calculations on the amount of carbon and the comparison, if we were to reuse the existing building, we'd be saving about, let's say, 11.5 units of carbon. So that's several years worth of the total energy it takes to run the building, just to provide a point of comparison. And I think that is the last slide.
Yeah, yes.
Almost.
So just back to the big framing, do we keep the old building or not? Do we build on one site or two? We've talked about a lot of the nuances, the pros, the cons, the things that can happen regardless of the choice, and the things that maybe there are choices about. So in just a moment, we're gonna invite you guys to dig in. Before we did that, I was gonna do just a soft close here because I know some people are gonna get their dots up here and take off. But February 3rd is the new rescheduled public workshop number 2. So that will be at 9:30 a.m., so half an hour earlier than the last one. Breakfast will start at 9. We encourage all of you guys to come. We had an amazing turnout at the first workshop in December, so please share the word. There will be flyers coming out soon, very soon, with a new date. And then, of course, we have our February and our March CPC meetings, which we'll see here. So we have a number of opportunities for you guys to give feedback. And just so you know, what we have is there's the 4 approaches we mentioned are up on the board. They're up back here. They're left to right, 1, 2, in the gap, and then 3 and 4. Next to each one is a copy of the, thank you, Vanna, of the goals that we presented at the very beginning of the meeting, and where we're starting to see some of the pros and the cons related to those goals. Because what we really want you to do is evaluate these schemes based on what we've all collectively decided are the goals for the project. And those are goals that have embedded through a number of different audiences. And then right at the middle in the back near PIP, we have a few more spectrums. These are very simple, and they hopefully will help us understand more about people's thoughts on the variable of open space versus more open space on site versus less open space on site, and keeping the 1929 building or not. But hold on, before you move.
I just had wanted to add one more thing, and this will, we didn't really talk about this in planning, so the architects might be a little surprised. But as far as when you're considering building on the 2-site option for either keeping historic or all new, I really appreciate your comments about the challenges with having the music program there and having to get to the track and field and be crossing 26. Putting the performing arts on that space was kind of, it's an easier planning move, I'd say, at this point, because it's large volume space and connected spaces that we know could go there. And also there were conversations about maybe it could be a separate thing that could operate for an evening time for performances, things like that. But if there are big challenges during the daily programming of that space, we could challenge the architect team to create another part of the program that goes on that site. So maybe it's all the CTE and shops and things like that. It has its own loading and work yard and stuff. So I just don't want. I think that maybe it's not that great of an idea to have performing arts there, but that doesn't mean we still couldn't build something there. So when people are considering the 2-site option, I just want people still to be open-minded about that. And thank you again for your comments.
That's great. Thank you. And thank you again, everybody, for coming. So we'll sort of softly dismiss you now, but please go to the back. and tell us your thoughts, and we're all there, and you can ask as many questions as you want.